Hello, and welcome to the third worked example video in the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT My EdSpace series. Today we're going to be looking at information retrieval free text questions and working through them as examples. I'm Eleanor, I'm one of the My EdSpace English teachers, and I will be guiding you through all of the content for the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT exam. Now, briefly, there is a whole video about this published as well, but the types of questions that information retrieval are asking you to complete are to find specific facts or details stated directly in the text. So in some ways, this is quite a straightforward question that they're asking you, because they're asking you to look at the text and not to make conclusions from it as such, but to answer and find the details about it. And it requires you to be very attentive to detail, as well as to synthesize and summarize the information in a passage quickly. This is what the questions will look like. There are lots of different options about reasons, time periods, why things were important when they were done originally, relationships between certain ideas. So, for example, what allowed or prevented X from doing Y, which of the following contributed to the topic, best describes, most commonly found, intended benefits or contributors or factors of things, true or not true, mentioned, not mentioned, or what do they say about a specific idea. Some pitfalls for this kind of question, I've mentioned these in a previous video as well. You're looking for details, and those details may be hidden using synonyms or paraphrasing, so that they're not as easy to find, and requires a real analytical and specific eye to find the information in the time you need and have on the UCAT verbal reasoning section. Sometimes these keywords are spread out, so you can't just see one of the keywords and make your choice based on that, but rather you need to skim the entire passage for keywords in order to make sure that they're not being contradicted later in the passage and thus steering you towards the wrong answer. You also need to look for bridging phrases between sentences so that you know for certain that those two ideas are related. Oftentimes they will put two sentences together and sort of lead you to thinking that they are cause and effect, but are not necessarily, unless they contain a bridging phrase like consequently, however, as a result, due to. There also may be gaps in the information that require conclusions, so the true versus not true examples. For instance, you might need to scan the passage for the details and then work out which one is not true, for example, and thus use what is missing in order to find the right answer. Let's look at a practice question and model how we would respond to it, and I'm going to speak out my thinking as we go. So question 1, what role do local councils play in this strategy? So we're looking for the role of local councils. Okay, and let's scan our options briefly. Pump installations for homeowners, these words stand out quite a lot. Building plans, as well as inspect and approve, because they would be doing those actions. We'd want to double check that they are given those powers. Carbon taxes and regional seem to stand out, and construction workers as well. Let's scan the passage and see what we notice here. Even as we look for our first key phrase, we can see local councils here. So it's likely that our information might be here, especially as we keep scanning, we can't see anything else about local councils or districts or boroughs. So let's start here and then think where we can go from here. So, legislation, part of a broader strategy to reduce national carbon output by 68% by 2030. Local councils were tasked with ensuring compliance. So this seems like this is what their responsibility was. And then the details of this through building inspections and planning approvals. Okay, this looks like Option B, right? They approve and inspect new building plans. That is what the local councils do based on this legislation. Let's keep checking just in case. Funding for retrofitting older buildings was also promised, though critics argue the support has been unevenly distributed. Okay, so retrofitting unevenly distributed, so that means that it may have that responsibility, but may not be as successful. So let's take a look at the question. Fund heat pump installations for homeowners. We can't see anything about heat pumps in that paragraph. We can see one here. These included limits and integration of renewable energy. This is not talking, though, about the local councils, but rather the UK government. So you may have seen heat pumps and thought, oh yes, that must be it, because those words are there, but we have to be careful. We're looking for the local council's role here. So that question A is definitely not our answer we're looking for. B, we said seemed good because it seems like all of that information is concentrated on the local councils and their role here. They enforce carbon taxes at a regional level. We haven't seen anything to do with that in this paragraph here where local councils appears. Let's just double check elsewhere in the passage. Limits on carbon emissions. Again, this has to do with the government and the properties, but not the local councils. And we're still looking for carbon taxes or carbon targets. Again, we're not seeing what we are looking for. Though the word carbon appears, we can't see anything about them being taxed in the by the local councils. So no. And then training to construction workers. Let's double check again. We've got training here as a word that stands out, and construction again in the same paragraph here. But this doesn't have anything to do with the local council. So though it appears to be right that the policies provide training to construction workers, it's not true that the councils provide that training, which is why we need to be eagle-eyed in this answer. We're looking specifically for the local councils whose role is to approve and inspect new building plans. So B is our answer. Let's take a look at another. What government action is mentioned in the second paragraph? So this is a great kind of question because we're guided straight to what we're looking for here. We're looking in this paragraph. So that might mean information outside of this paragraph might distract us, but we'll double check what we're looking for before we decide on an answer. Reducing the number of housing projects. Okay. We're seeing older buildings, and we're seeing about planning approvals and building inspections. We can't say anything about housing projects in particular or them being reduced, but rather that they hadn't actually done the retrofitting they needed to. So that doesn't seem right. Introducing a carbon tax on construction companies. That appears to be a split up of keywords because we've got construction here, we've got information about construction across and carbon across, but we can't see anything about construction industries being taxed here. So let's cross off B. Assigning local councils responsibility for building compliance. Again, we see that keyword there, compliance and compliance. In this second paragraph, we know that these councils have responsibility for compliance, so this seems right, but let's double check D just to be sure. Launching a scheme to promote car-free city centres. We have not seen that, certainly in this paragraph, and we cannot see anywhere that that's referenced other than in the transport sector areas needing parallel reform, and these new residential properties needing to be updated. So perhaps that has to do with the city centres. But we know that this is not appearing in the second paragraph at all. So we know it's not D. We have to go with C. And final question for today's video. What does the text say about renewable energy targets? Let's take a look for that word targets, or maybe something like goals. This is part of a broader strategy, for example, to reduce carbon output. These are the effects, so not necessarily the goal. If we go back, actually, I'm just noticing aimed at doing this and what it requires. Okay. We know that people expressed concerns and that it had wide-ranging effects. We know that not everyone was directly impacted. We know that it seems 2 years later things would be extended, and that the long-term goal is to align with the net zero carbon targets and with the goal eventually of getting to a greener future. Let's take a look at our options. They only apply to government-owned buildings, public sector and government buildings. That is somewhat synonym paraphrasing ideas, but it suggests that this would be happening in 2022, and this original policy was introduced in 2020, so that doesn't sound right. That they only apply, because what have they been doing for the last 2 years? Talking about residential properties, not government buildings. B, they only form part of a wider emissions reduction strategy. That seems right. We've looked for strategy, we found it, and this part of a broader strategy. Broader and wider are synonyms, so that makes sense to guide us towards that moment. And it's true, right? This renewable energy target is part of fitting into the carbon output and net zero carbon targets that we were mentioned in the second and final paragraph. Set to be reviewed in 2025. If we scan for the word 2025, here we find it, the number 2025. But this is only in reference to the properties being built after this time, needing to meet different standards. It doesn't say anything, if you keep scanning through, that this ever was set to be reviewed, but just that there were more documents released in 2022. And D, they remain entirely, and we don't really like that word because it's a little too definitive. They remain entirely voluntary for the private sector. We don't know that, right? Because, for example, we know that the support has been unevenly distributed. We know that things are promised. We know that people are trying to prompt investment, but also that people are expressing concerns. And we can't see anything that suggests that this policy requires the companies to be entirely voluntary. Rather, they suggest that these areas here are areas that need reform, like the new residential properties, and that, for example, even if we go back to this first paragraph, all new buildings are required to meet these updated standards. So that sounds like it is not voluntary, and that the companies will be forced to do them, forced to comply with the regulation. So that does not sound right, and we are left with B. That's it for this worked example video. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.